Claro, 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 obvio. Diríamos el subsuelo de la carta. Más expertos todavía. Tienen el manual de sonceras argentinas del resto, ¿no?
Oh, shoot. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I've got her on here.
Well, hello, good evening, good day to everyone. My name is Sofia Monsalve. I am your facilitator today. I'm the Secretary General of Qiana International. Qiana International is a human rights organization working on the right to food and nutrition and connected rights like the right to land or the right to seeds and water. I would like to thank you, Urgency and Reapers, for this invitation today to be with you and join this series of webinars, the third of the webinars that Reapers has been organizing around the COVID-19 crisis. I'm really happy and thankful to Judith and to Urgency and Reapers for having been invited. I remember that before the crisis broke out, Judith and I were discussing in the context of the global network on the right to food and nutrition, because Urgency is member as FIAN of this network, and we were trying to figure out whether we wanted to do something together with Reapers in the context also of the social forum, and we were actually planning to have some joint activities. I remember it was around June. So I guess that's not going to be possible. So the more glad I'm here today to get to know you and many of you. So it is really a pleasure to be here. Okay, so I think you know the topic today is about discussing what are the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on the right to food and on food sovereignty from the perspective of small-scale food producers, but also from the perspective of consumers. So that would be our main topic today. And of course, we will discuss what is the role of the social solidarity economy in provided responses, not only to the emergency, but more importantly, in the long run, in terms of the restructuring of our economies and our societies, which is probably the most important part of it in order to be able to overcome the multiple crises that we are facing, have been facing with. I forgot to mention that I am actually Colombian from origin, but I've been living abroad or outside Colombia for many years, mainly in Europe, and I'm currently based in Heidelberg in Germany. Okay, so I think we can get started. So I would like to request first Qiana to share with us her views on perhaps first, what is your reading, Diana? How did we get here? Why are we confronted now with this crisis, and specifically also how this pandemic is affecting the right to food of your community of producers and consumers? Qiana, if you could briefly introduce yourself first.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry my video is not working, but I will definitely articulate as strong as possible and send good energy. My name's Qiana Mickie. I'm the Special Projects Consultant of Just Food, and I'm also on the IC board of Urgency, as well as a participant in the civil society mechanism. I'm based in Harlem. I'm here in New York City, kind of in the epicenter of the US right now, given this, in the light of this crisis. And at the same time, still trying to stay healthy, keep family healthy, strategize on how to keep local food coming into the city and supporting farmers as well as community and consumers. And so thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. A lot of points that I think are coming up, but I think a good place to start would be to kind of talk about, from my vantage point, where I see how we got here. I think how we got here as a global community is the increased reliance on a big supply corporate ag system, you know, in capitalism in particular, and in food, in general, and in food in particular. And this big supply chain around corporate ag, whether commodity products or and meat. And something that has been coming up for us, I think folks are seeing as well, but also in America, recently Smithfield, which is one of the biggest consolidators of pork, he had mentioned, and it sent a lot of shimmers and to folks, there is a struggle with our food supply. And it's not, the big supply chains are struggling. Yes, capitalism is crumbling, but it was crumbling already, and it was already and it was already on the fault lines of inequities that are already in our system around place, around labor and race and class and exploitation of land. And I think COVID, this crisis, has kind of exacerbated those fault lines, and we're falling deeper. But that message and that fear is exactly what people struggle with. And I think it's important to understand, that's a struggle of bottleneck. It's not a struggle of food. And in fact, there's it's a bottleneck of the food and how that food is being processed and how it's getting to folks. And that is not the same struggle that we're having on the local supply chain. So when we're talking about small to mid-scale farmers, diversified farmers, folks that are supporting farmers markets and CSAs, part of that struggle is the disconnect in our chain, but our chain is a lot smaller. Our practices are a lot more humane, how we treat our labor, how we treat the food that we're growing. And those are two different things. But I think in the midst of crisis, what we continue to hear and see is that those big chains want to reknit themselves. And what we see over time, throughout our history is, this reknit of this capitalist system, this reknit of big supply chain, and it becomes more exploitative, more extractive to people and to land and to resources. And this is really a time, even though we're in a crisis and there's a lot of substantial fear and real fear, to kind of disseminate some of that and really see what is the opportunity to really support local work, alternative systems, and really lean in or push more for food sovereignty and social justice principles in this time more than ever, and to support each other, as opposed to investing. And how I connect the dots to that and how I feel like I'm seeing that here on the ground is the reknit between big supply and the existing connections to food and charity, and the charity model and emergency food. And so there's a lot of resources and interest being diverted to commodity farms, larger supply, and policies trying to, again, really fast connect that supply chain to food banks or just food pantries. But those are still systems that were always going to be persistently charitable. Those are systems that are not getting, they're not self-determined models like CSA. They're not self-determined models of how people are deciding what food gets in. And the quality of the food changes too. And then it becomes a question of focusing on excess crops. And so what it's now trying to see, and what we see here in America, and I'm sure in other places, is this overdependence on looking for excess. Whereas when we look at the scale of local farmers, they're not working to have excess. You might have a small amount of excess in terms of crop planting, but in fact, what you're trying to do is maximize your yield, your production, who's getting that food. You know, a CSA model, again, is very important, and I think we've seen in so many different ways, but even that, farmers are growing food because that food has a home. And so when we are, pushing people to only see what is excess, it's really speaking to a larger supply chain, again, that is exploitative, and then that food is really not the best of that food, and then that becomes what is conditioned for only disproportionate and marginalized communities. So we have to really, how we got here is how we might stay here if we continue to focus on that and not really focus on diverting support and resources and really having an analysis between what is the big supply and what does food sovereignty look like in the advent of COVID in a crisis. Because what we know is resilient, agricultural practices, democratic systems that are built on choice, making sure the most impacted, whether that's folks of color, whether that's LGBTQ folks, whether that's mixed income, homebound folks, the most marginalized in our community should be the most addressed and have the most say in the work and food and models that are coming into that are supplying them. And the closer you are to your food, the more transparency you have to that farmer, to that practices. And especially now in the age of COVID and concern about social distancing and food safety, you would want to know how far your food came, how many hands have been touching it, and have that transparency and the connection to your farmer. You get that in CSAs, you can get that in farmers markets, you get that in a local food supply chain. You're not gonna get that in big supply, no matter how much way they slice it. And I think, something that I just wanted to make sure that I was touching on is the importance of food sovereignty and social justice now, as well as investing and resourcing our local supply chain. I see here, in New York, there's a lot of conversation about money and food, and so much of it is getting focused on just emergency food or just bigger suppliers, mid to large scale farmers and those kind of chains. What we're missing is existing proven models of self-determination in our community that could go even further if money that was considered paying a farmer directly a fair price, either through supporting CSA membership or through institutional purchasing of sustainable, organically, supportive practices, IPM practices, you could actually get farmers to utilize those channels even more. So folks that were food insecure don't have to be food insecure, but you're not diverting them to a system that will keep them food insecure. So if you're in the food pantry system now more than ever, and we're seeing more folks in that, while it's meeting the need, and I'm not minimizing the need, we need to just have an analysis of how long that model stays and how charitable it really is if it's still connecting to commodity crops and keeping folks in a system that will never be self-determined. You will never figure out how to get your food. You're not going to pay a farmer. That's most of that food is donation, as we know. And so in crises, food banks actually, increase. What we should be working and supporting is finding ways to bring resources to local supply, so farmers are able to farm at their potential. Folks that are able to buy at that scale can, and if there's folks that need more support, those additional resources can go to that. I thought that, I know that's a lot, but I think it's just, I thought I wanted to make sure that just like really gets lifted as we like open this conversation. I want to open it up to like other folks, but I really do see on the ground CSA, especially in the work that we do at Just Food, and building equity-driven models and trying to make sure equity from farm to table, and there's a dignity to food, a dignity to price, farmers getting a fair price, people getting good food at the right time at peak, and not only seeing it as excess, and not marginalizing our communities that are already disproportionately impacted by the fault lines of how we got here, relying so much on big ag. So with that, I want to kick it to Judith, because I can share so much on the front line of what I'm seeing in New York, but I would love to hear what you're seeing globally as well.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks, Qiana. And really hello to everybody, because we have people really from all over the world. And a special shout out to one of my grandsons who has joined us while he's confined in Ireland. So to pick up from what you were saying, Qiana, the first thing is, how did we get here? Well, scientists have been warning us for many years that there were going to be pandemics and that they were going to come from the industrial food system, because CAFOs, industrial animal farming, is really a source of many diseases, and the jump from animals to humans is really increasingly worrying. So this was really all an accident waiting to happen, except that none of us and humanity as a whole really wasn't ready for the scale of all of this. But we're here. So we're not starting from nowhere in our response, however. What I'd like to say is that the concept of sustainable food systems is really not new. The food sovereignty movement started in the 1980s, the social solidarity economy movement in the 1990s, and in fact, community-supported agriculture, and I'm the president of the Global Community-Supported Agriculture Network, as well as a member of the Social Solidarity Economy Board. Community-supported agriculture started in Japan in the 1970s, where it was already a response to industrial pollution of food systems. Now, what is different here is in 2008, there was a major food crisis at global level as a result of the economic and financial crash in 2008. But this time, there is one huge difference. There is no shortage of food. The issue is going to be, how can people afford to buy the food when they are living on daily wages, like in India, like in the States, like in some European employment as well, where people are really on an hourly or a daily wage. So the question is, how do people access food? It's also really important to note that every year the FAO publishes a report called SOFI, which is the State of Food Security in the World. And already in the 2019 report, there was an uptick, an increase in the food insecurity, including in the developed countries. And I really underline that, because part of what we're going to be facing and what we're already facing is how to overcome the food insecurity and ensure the right to food everywhere, not just in Africa, not just in some of the Asian or Latin American countries, but in our highly developed, in inverted commas, countries in Europe and North America. So really, the major economic shock that is going to come and that is starting is going to increase the food insecurity. And we need to use the fact that social and solidarity economy ensures a fairer distribution and redistribution of all resources, is based very largely on the concept of the commons. And this is a critical question. We need to work on the logic of intersectionality between our different movements in order to ensure that there is much deeper equity and food justice through social solidarity economy and food sovereignty coming together. So the second subject I'd like to talk about is the question of COVID and community-supported agriculture and other forms of social solidarity economy linked to sustainable food systems. COVID started in China. Our Chinese network, which is several 100,000 people strong, had a 300% increase in demand. 300%. It's absolutely huge. Currently in Europe, there is between 20 and 40% increased demand. Now, this, of course, poses something of an issue because most CSA farms are not very large. We're talking about peasant agriculture, small-scale family farms, and the whole structuring of community-supported agriculture is a subscription basis on a year or on a seasonal basis. So there's a limited amount of expansion possible. But what we have seen is the community-supported agriculture networks at national level and at local or regional level supporting the creation of new platforms to allow producers to connect directly with consumers so that the local, sustainable, nutritious, healthy food systems is actually in place and the food is getting to people. Now, Qiana mentioned also the question of the cost. And this is another huge challenge because, for example, in Bordeaux, where my elder son is living, they have seen spontaneous vegetable boxes being created in a very opportunistic way. And they are twice the price of what he pays for his community-supported agriculture network box. So there are people who are going to take advantage of the situation. What we need is local authorities and national authorities to support the vulnerable so that they can buy into the sustainable local and territorial food systems. Something else I wanted to mention is that while many markets, farmers' markets, were not allowed to exist, at least in the very beginnings of COVID, and still the case very often, Community-supported agriculture is something that was authorized everywhere in the world because very few people come into contact with your food. Hygiene is respected. There was a huge, very fast response to developing procedures for ensuring that special safety measures were in place, and also in terms of social distancing for picking up the shares and the boxes on a weekly basis. So that is something that is really important to underline. We also need to look at how we can move, generally speaking, to a much broader framework, including a policy framework that will take into account not only CSA, but also certain forms of vegetable boxes, community gardens, which are another very important form of social and solidarity economy, cooperative shops, particularly farmers' cooperative shops, and collective purchasing groups. Now, another thing that hasn't been touched on at all is the issue of school feeding programs. A lot of children around the world, and that includes in our developed countries, be it in North America or in Europe, a lot of children, the only meal they get in the day is through their school meals. So we need to push for systems that ensure that those children are getting food. And we need to push for policy frameworks, which is something we are doing, to ensure that there is solidarity, economy, collective purchasing to cook healthy, nutritious school meals for children. So those are some of the aspects that I think are really important. And we need to make sure that the local food is really prioritized because it is healthy. When you have highly processed food available in the supermarkets with lots of trans fats and sugar, it decreases people's immunity, it increases the non-communicable diseases like heart issues and diabetes, whereas healthy, fresh fruit, vegetables, and other local produce largely increases the immunity of the people who are eating it because it's seasonal, it's fresh, the vitamins are not lost, and also the microbiome is linked to a healthy human microbiome and boosts the immune system. So I don't want to take up any more time because I want to go back to Sophia maybe with some comments.
Yes, thank you very much, Qiana and Judith. I think it's an excellent way to start this discussion. I think our audience is already quite eager to discuss more in depth some of these aspects. I also liked a lot, we can start seeing differences, I think some nuances in how the situation is in North America is impacting what kind of questions and issues are there, and also compared to the situation in France or in Europe that you started sharing with us, Judith. So I would like the audience to wait a little bit with your questions. I'm noting them, but let's listen first from Marcus. Marcus is gonna share with us a very concrete experience. And Marcus is supposed to share with us how the existing social solidarity economy is in fact already providing important responses to the crisis. So Marcus, please.
Sure thing. Thank you, Sophia. And thanks, Qiana and Judith, for inviting me to this and letting me kind of glom on. I'll say my name is Marcus Hill. I'm from Winston-Salem, based here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in the southeast of the United States. I've been here for about 20 years, and I'm on the board of RIPES and one of the coordinators of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, and I've been working on equitable food system development efforts for about the past 10 years, primarily here in North Carolina. So yeah, I wanted to share one project I'm working on right now for a grassroots perspective in response to this COVID-19 situation. So just real quick for some background, Winston-Salem, because it's a community-based project. Winston-Salem is the 5th largest city in North Carolina with a population of about 250,000. It's been noted that this is one of the most food insecure regions in the country, and also one of the worst regions for economic mobility, fortunately. It's still very segregated as a city along class and race, and it's plagued by gentrification like so many other places, and has a long history of racist housing policies, inequitable investment, and for many, just poor access to sufficient resources. And so as such, there's just very few safety nets, and I would say insufficient political inclusion for a large portion of our population. And much of what COVID-19 has been exposing in terms of, as Qiana and Judith already said, our fragile and inadequate social and economic systems has really just been here all along for our disenfranchised neighborhoods. I mean, it's really a nice place to live. I know I'm not selling it that well, but it is what it is. But so while we have, the fragility of, this capitalist food system and I'd say the mainstreaming of everyone's anxieties about it, that's kind of the reality now. These conditions really aren't all that dissimilar from what many of our neighborhoods have already been enduring. So our response has been to essentially continue to push our long-term vision for inclusive community development and keep building. I think there's, the constant conversation around charity versus long-term sustainable solutions is really, really real for Winston-Salem. And most of the responses that we see to our food situation have been constantly in the charity model. And so we've really been seeing the need to build up actual infrastructure for long-term sustainable, equitable, real development. So that's what we've been working on. So the project itself is, we're looking at this dedicated way of seeing if we can create viable livelihoods out of urban agriculture in a very strategic and specific way. We are in the process of creating a neighborhood-based nonprofit with board representation across many of our disenfranchised neighborhoods, just so that we can all learn and strategize together. And that'll serve as the kind of core organizing hub. And then out of that, we are working with graduates of, we actually have a urban farm school in the area, graduates of this urban farm school to start an urban farmers cooperative. And so the purpose there being for collective purchasing, resource sharing, better market access, a base for collective land ownership by way of a community land trust. These are all primarily graduates of this urban farm school are typically low income, perhaps difficult to employ community members. And so to be able to actually create a viable future out of urban agriculture, there just needs to be some more structure, some more resources to actually complement what they're learning in that program. And so the Urban Farmers Cooperative could actually give a nice foundation for actually, sowing some roots into what that urban farming future could actually be for them. So in addition to the Urban Farmers Cooperative, we purchased a bus, and we're looking to start a mobile food hub for both transporting urban farmers that may have limited transportation, as well as aggregating and distributing both urban and rural product in the area. There's also potential there with new CSA development out of our urban farms by way of this new distribution infrastructure. And as it's been said, all of this is really directly responding to this increased demand for local food that we're seeing right now, I think worldwide. In addition to those pieces, there are a couple of cultural and political components to all of this that really aid in this broader community-focused organizing beyond just solely food economics. But I think when you bring in the culture and the politics in general, they really complement and aid what can be possible in terms of actually shifting shifting change in these ways. And also a ecological component too, in that we're trying to work with the city to get them to institute some organic landscape maintenance for our nearby city parks. So cultural, political, economic, ecological, trying to hit all of those areas in this very, very focused, very, very local way. I do want to touch on real quick just some of the frameworks that we're working out, so you can kind of see and dig deeper into how we're pulling this together. First, the structure of this project is informed partially by the work that the Democracy Collaborative has been doing with their work around, they've done some really good work around exploring models of decolonized community wealth building and this kind of structure of anchor collaboratives. Those are ways to create like collaborative ecosystems of anchor institutions like hospitals and schools and whatnot that can support these kinds of community projects in mutually beneficial ways. It's a little different than traditional philanthropic or service-oriented, service recipient models, very different than charity. So there's been some really nice structural things coming out of that. And then the project elements are, as you can probably see, informed a lot by just solidarity economy in terms of the co-ops, the CSA, the land trust. And then finally, I'd say this participatory democratic, just participatory political dimension to it has several roots, but one has been, a lot of this has come out of our work with food policy councils. I've also coordinated one food policy council and been part of many. And that's been, food councils or food policy councils, however you label them, has been a nice kind of microcosm of political democracy in ways that I haven't really seen exist in community. And so that's been a really useful tool. And I think if your communities aren't already engaging with food policy councils or starting them or kind of leveraging that kind of coalition building, there's a lot to gain there. And so, yeah, I was told I only had 5 or 6 minutes, so I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but that's kind of the very quick overview of what we're working on a grassroots level in response to all of this.
Great, Marcus. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, okay, I think the spirit of the webinar is more of having a fluid conversation. So therefore, I would like to encourage the audience to take the floor now. I noted 3 questions. If you want to put the questions yourself and briefly introduce yourself, you are welcome to do so. Otherwise, I think I have noted, and Qiana has also already noted them. Otherwise, we can also let, I don't know, other questions come in now. So who wishes to take the floor?
Can I?
I can't see you. Vicky?
Vicky, yeah.
Yes, please, Vicky, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you for this webinar. I run a green market in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm 8 years old, and we do have a CSA, which has been very successful. But, we are urban. And so my real question is about urban agriculture. And I would like both Qiana, who did give me something in the chat, and Marcus, to talk a little bit about the issues of intensification of agriculture in neighborhoods and urban areas. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vicky. So let's go for the round, and then I will ask the speakers then to respond to the questions. Who else would like to take the floor?
May
I can't see you raising the hand.
Hello.
Yes, Eri, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Eri from Indonesia. So at the first, Indonesia is very diverse. This is archipelago. Talking about the food, it is many different situations between the Java Islands, where mostly more developed rather than in the island. But shortly, what I want to raise here, that most of the agriculture, particularly crops Indonesia, is dominated by informal sectors, not like the big scale industrials as mentioned, sharing by some the participants here. So, so now the problems is that I see, however, talking about the right to food, we are talking as well with the agrarian reform, because most of the farmers is not own the land itself. That means most of the land in the rural area is owned by the with the other persons or the landlord who are living in the cities. So this access to food, access to land at the first is the basic challenge of the right to food in Indonesia. But another case that I want to shortly share with you, in many other in these situations in Indonesia, that the diversity of food is very important to introduce, because for example, now many provinces, many community now become dependent to the rice, while in the past they are have more diverse staple food. So this consume this that rice more belongs to the favorite of the staple food, now becomes the problems for the island who are not have the rice field there. So I think that is important as well to promote. That means the principle of the promoting local food is as well bring you more resilient to the situations like COVID and any other disaster situations. So this is short sharing from my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Eri. I see that Ariel has posted quite a long thing. I didn't even manage to read. I wonder whether you would prefer to share with us from South America, from the Amazon region. Ariel.
Hello, I can read. I just put down to organize it. So news from South America in Amazonia. Manaus, a 2 million inhabitant city, capital of the biggest state in Brazil, Amazonas, with 4 million in total, are now with the collapsed public health system and funerary system. There are boxes for the week, average of 150 people dying every day of COVID for the next 4 days only. And as a founder of the first CSA here in Manaus, I see we are one of the few initiatives which are responding positively to the pandemic. There are peasant farmers are dying every day. Entire families are contaminated. Some of them even with harvest stealing. Just to have an idea of the level of the population food insecurity. We are working 24/7 in a task force here with food distribution, state company, agroecology network, university, and try to get to spread CSA and new forms of productive and social organization based on solidarity economy in a great urgent action. We're looking ways to quickly link farmers and consumers, finding the right socioeconomic viability of farm and productive capacity and logistic capacity. And the school food program, we are working together to get farmers to send this food straight to the parents of the kids on their home. We're trying to deal with this logistics, and we're really looking for many CSA members. We're just like every week sending a box to people which are in social vulnerability, because we have some producer exceeding, and we think everyone should eat organic, even if they have never listened to organic or agroecology. That's our working group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I'll take Gita, and after we go for a round of responses. Gita, please.
She's there. She has a question. Are you able to see her question, Sophia?
No, where is it? It's in the chat.
Okay, I'll try to capture her question and we can circle back. I'll bring it up again.
Okay. Then let's go for the round of responses, please. Don't forget the questions in the chat. One was around the food waste and the right, let's say, response from government, how to redirect that out of, let's say, charity. Then we had the issues around nutrition. What happens if CSAs cannot provide all or meet all nutritional needs of the community? And then the question around infrastructure. The main problem of connecting, of course, producers and consumers in large cities is, of course, an infrastructure problem. So let's start with Qiana.
Okay. Yeah, so to touch on Vicky's question first around urban ag. Yes, I definitely think urban ag can play a role in, scaling up to production to kind of help meet, diverse needs of food security or food sovereignty in their community. But, I think from my vantage point, and I think, urban can be very different for different folks in different parts of the country, is that there's here in the city, we definitely need improved urban ag policy that's comprehensive and realistic to the scale and spectrum of urban ag. So that means, in particular for me, I want to make sure that policy supports community-based, collective-based urban ag that has been in communities for years, that we're feeding folks when other systems, grocery stores and such divested from those communities. I think that means also being clear, like it's not equitable in terms of the resources and capacity and infrastructure that they're working with and connection to money and resources to scale up. And the city and the state, and even on the federal level, can do much to address those inequities on, because there is a spectrum of urban ag. And sometimes when people say urban ag, they mean, high tech or venture capital based urban ag, who have resources and opportunities to connect to and already have like systems of enterprise in place. A lot of community-based ag, urban ag, do not have those systems, that infrastructure or that acumen, and that's going to take time to connect and build. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think somebody also mentioned in the chat too, while there's like a genuine need for urban ag, there still needs to be a connection and intersection of production and meeting cultural needs around food in the urban ag space and an intersection with rural. You're going to need both to really meet the needs of urban ag communities, not just in desire and taste and cultural relevancy, but in terms of scale. And I think the more that there's cohesion and connecting to encouraging and supporting, enterprise in urban ag spaces, and giving the scale to have the facilities to do that in terms of production, like community-based hubs, and maybe replicating or looking to infrastructure that is proven, that are elements of already existing social solidarity economy models like co-ops, like CLTs, like community-based hubs, and making sure you're integrating equity, that could be more realistic, and understanding that that's going to take time to ramp up.
Thank you. Judith.
Hello. I think several of the questions have posed the issue of urban-rural linkages. And this is something that really does need to be strengthened, both in terms of policy. Sorry, there's somebody with their mic on. I'm not sure who it is. In terms of policy and in terms of organizational approaches. Transport from peri-urban areas into the city is never a really long distance. It's the organization of the spaces and the way it's done that is important. In terms of that, I'd like to say that urban agriculture is important, but it can never meet anything like the food needs of any city. Peri-urban spaces, however, are a particularly hot issue because there's the constant tension between cities that wish to expand, speculation on land to build new housing, and preserving the historical food net of our cities. And that is really what is important. We need to use the tools that we have. And Sophia was one of the people mainly responsible for negotiating a really important document, which are the voluntary guidelines for the governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests. And we can use that to pressure local authorities to preserve the peri-urban spaces where we grow food for our cities and which were the historical food net of our cities. Eri, you mentioned the question of land, and that is really critical. There are two other dimensions to that, of course, which are the right and access to water and also to peasant seeds. And the struggle internationally of our social movements for land, water, and seeds is really the cornerstone of the whole food sovereignty movement, because if we don't have the land, if we don't have seeds that are not patented, but free peasant seeds, because the big transnational corporations patent the seeds, and then you have to buy them every year and so on. And what we believe is that seeds should be freely exchanged between our farmers, and also the right and access to the water we need to grow our food. We cannot have the realization of food sovereignty or the right to food. Other aspects are that we need to also make sure that farmers' markets are supported by neighborhood authorities and local authorities, together with the community land trusts that Qiana very quickly mentioned, because they are a way of protecting and preserving urban land and also rural farms and as a means of growing our own food. On the question of home delivery, it is an important aspect, and we do need to be able to take it into consideration right now. For example, in China and also in the Basque Country, in Spain, the CSAs have switched to home delivery to make sure that people were able to get their food, because of course many people are totally confined to their homes, especially the elderly. The notion of participatory democracy and food policy councils is a very crucial way of getting a strong handle on food sovereignty and the right to food in a fair and equitable way. And that needs to be coordinated, of course, between local authorities and the local communities. And it's really great that you brought that up, Marcus. Ariel, my heart is breaking reading you, because the situation in Manaus it just sounds so terrible. I think that there are a number of things that can be done, perhaps, and let's have a call in the coming days to talk about it, partly to see how you can set up an online platform to connect the producers who have food with the consumers who need the food, not just through CSA, but also in a broader sense. And also how to organize the food into boxes with a drive-through system where people have already paid online or can pay possibly by contactless cards. and where the food is then just placed in the box, in the boot of their cars, or home delivery. And I think, you know, I really wish from the bottom of my heart that we can all help you and that the situation in Manaus gets better soon, because when our food producers are losing their lives,
Yeah.
it's another whole level of distress for us all. Okay, Sophia, do you want to maybe hand over to Marcus or
yes,
wrap
Marcus,
it up?
Yes, exactly. Marcus, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, your turn.
Yeah, just in response to Vicky's question about the intensification of urban ag, some of the stuff that we've looked at, and I think Judith and Qiana, you've probably already touched on a lot of this, but one policy and making sure that, you know, the municipal area is actually on board with what you're trying to do. We actually had to, they didn't allow urban farming here 5 years ago. We had to get that changed. And then looking at, you know, other policies like can we institute, you know, some kind of local purchasing ordinance just to kind of ramp up demand for local product. And I think something like that has the potential for both helping urban and rural producers in the area. Certainly the land access situation, you know, if you're going to try to support the production of urban farming, you know, can we take it out of the market so it's not under the same market forces and pressure that gentrifies everything else? Because you know how much time that takes to actually invest to create a productive space. And so that's why the land trust is crucial part of this. And then the collective and cooperative farming, just to share what, you know, are already meager resources a bit more wisely. And then there's a lot of education, I think, that needs to be done, especially at the traditional holders of power locally, so that they understand that urban farming and these kinds of community programs are as exciting, if not more exciting, than the big tech projects that come and go. Our city just gave $1.5 million to a hydroponics project that's going to produce tomatoes for a restaurant, and it's a little disheartening because that money could have gone to so much of this other infrastructure that we're trying to build. And so that educational piece and just trying to make sure people understand what's actually at stake and what long-term vision looks like and what sustainability actually looks like can go a long way. So that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, can we go for the last round of questions? Or how do we need to stop at 7 sharp?
Yeah, I think it's 7 sharp.
Ah, okay. Well, then perhaps, yes, a small comment from my side. Judith told you that I think my background has been more or less entirely dedicated to land struggles, and I've seen a discussion in this chat about land. And yes, I think is one of the absolutely central, I think, issues to reshape our food systems and our economies, but because what we have seen worldwide is a massive concentration of landed resources and also of land in cities. And I think we need to continue, working or expanding our activism, struggles, and campaigns for redistribution of land resources. I think there is no other way also to tackle the ecological destruction that we are facing. If, for instance, Olam, the big palm oil plantation multinational, is controlling 3 million hectares worldwide. So this is a clear case of a global landlord, and it's going to be impossible to stop the climate crisis if we continue allowing for that model of extraction and ecological destruction. And I think the same goes for the cities. I mean, with the financialization of cities, at least here in Europe and I think in Germany, but in Barcelona, it's also a very powerful movement calling for it shouldn't be allowed that a financial asset company owns more than 3,000 3,000 flats or flats, apartments in a city like Berlin. So we are discussing issues of this has to be again put under the control of the municipalities. It used to be actually, let's say, social property. And I think this is are the discussions that we are seeing in many places, but we need to, I think, revitalize the efforts of the call for the need to redistribute resources and put them under the control of communities. Okay, so I think it has been an extremely rich discussion. I think many topics that would have been great to have more time to discuss, I think. But I think, it was a great exchange. I look forward also to the next webinar in this series. And also I look forward to remain in contact with RIPAS on the whole network. So thank you to the speakers. Thank you again for the invitation. Of course, to the audience for your engagement and interest.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. And this webinar is going to be put up on the RIPAS site and also, I think, on YouTube. So it'll be possible to view it again and for you to share it with your friends and your networks. And it's really been a very exciting moment to share with all of you. Some of it's encouraging, some of it is heartbreaking, but the stronger we are and the more networked we are, the more we can achieve. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
everybody. Good night. Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Welcome.